Hello everybody, Glitch Reaper here again, and I'm here with some more Magic Duels tutorials, and I had an idea of another grouping of skills to do for the skills quest this time, and I was thinking that it would be things from the Kaladesh block. And what I mean by that is there's certain things that were introduced in that block. Now there's some other things that were kind of associated with it, but I'm not sure if they were really 100% starting with it, but I think I'm going to go with those. Oh wait, I may need to turn the music down just a little bit more again. Because I'm not sure how that goes with this sometimes. Just a tip. There we go. Okay, so yeah, that should work that out nicely. Okay. Now, as I was going to say, there's certain things that were introduced in the Kaladesh block. That included Kaladesh, that included Ether Revolt, which are both included here. It also included like a specialty set called Kaladesh Inventions. Now, in Magic Duels, we just have Kaladesh and Ether Revolt here. And I'm going to kind of group those together. I'm going to look to see if there was anything else I recognize that was specifically in that block. But somehow I don't think so. I think it was mainly just a small cluster of things that I know about. Again, there's some things that were introduced much earlier that may kind of go along with that I might put around later. But I'll have to see about that. Okay, I think that's... okay, so I think it's all on the first page, basically. Okay. But yeah, there's certain things that were seriously introduced in the Kaladesh block, and I'm going to go over some of the more important things to think about there. And they include energy, the Revolt class of abilities, vehicles, and improvise. So basically these four things here are all kind of in that block. And I mean kind of because while these three things here were pretty much started off with Kaladesh itself, Revolt was added in with Ether Revolt, partially just due to the name. Sometimes they do theme these things just that way. But I'm going to start off with some things that were introduced in Kaladesh directly first and then move on. So one of the big things is something that's going to be seen in sets afterwards for a long time, because it was such a cool concept, people liked it, although it will be the heaviest set on it. Sometimes when a set introduces a dynamic, it becomes one of the most heavy with that new dynamic. In this case, I'm going to go over vehicles, which are very essential to playing Kaladesh, as well as something that may show up in the game in later sets. And so that's something to know about. And again, Magic Duels is great for demonstrating this stuff, regardless of whether it's the physical game or in the skill quests here in Magic Duels. So let's go with vehicles. The thing about it is basically what it's describing is you have it where it enters the field as an artifact, but by paying a certain crew cost in an interesting fashion, then it becomes an artifact creature, which means it's both an artifact and a creature. And artifacts are usually colorless, although there are exceptions. But just having the designation, just having the major type artifact is a big deal. There's a lot of things that do and do not affect artifacts, so that's kind of a big deal. And there's a lot of them that are not creatures, a lot of them that are just artifacts, and that's actually kind of a special distinction that it is both, because that means it can be affected by things that affect both artifacts and creatures. And in the case of vehicles, they only become an artifact creature whenever they're crewed. That means that certain creatures are considered operating them. Now, in the game, the crew cost is actually paid in an interesting fashion, and it's probably better I demonstrate this directly than just describe it in this case. It'll be a lot more illustrative. Because there are certain things like that. It's better to see them in action. And this is one of those things that was a kind of a newer concept in the game that was introduced in recent times. So for long-time players, you may want to learn something new here. Okay, so I'm kind of leaving a little time to read this. But anyhow, uh, as I was saying before about crewing, the general idea of how you crew it is you tap any number of creatures whose power is at least equal to the crew cost. So that can be one creature that fulfills having that much power. It can be several that add up to it. It doesn't matter. Now, the creatures, it doesn't matter why they were untapped in the first place, or if you untap them after crewing it. It just matters that you tap them at that time. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so what this is saying is basically a classic defend and then return fire. Yep. Okay, now in this case I have a couple of vehicles already here. The Aradara Express and a Sky Skiff. Now, both of these come from the Kaladesh Block, as you can see, and this is like the symbol for Kaladesh. And they have different abilities on them each. In fact, it might also be a good time to go over a few of these abilities in general while I'm here, as kind of a special bonus. This creature here has flying. What that means is that, well, once it becomes a creature, right now it's just sitting there as a vehicle waiting to be crewed, but what flying means is it can block and be blocked by creatures with flying, and otherwise things that don't have flying or a special ability called reach can't block them. So if an enemy doesn't have flying, then you will literally fly right over them. Although reach means they can reach up and snatch you, but they're not really flying. So a lot of spiders have that ability. It's kind of the concept of them spinning a web and then trapping their flying enemies, kind of like flying bugs that they get stuck in their webs in real life. So there's a reason why a lot of spiders have that ability. Also, really, really tall creatures like giants have the habit of having reach. But this has straight up flying, and flying was something that was in the game for a really, really, really long time. Like, so it's pretty basic to it, and one of the reasons why I was wondering why it wasn't in the so-called basic skill lessons. Now, in terms of what I need to do here, I need to reply to this creature over there by crewing this so that I can block it. Because right over here is a creature with flying. It's got a Sky Whirl Harrier with 3 points of power and 4 points of toughness. I doubt my creature is going to be able to take the hit. Now, it doesn't show power and toughness here right now because it's not a creature yet. But whenever you zoom in on it, you'll see that it actually does. In this case, it's a 2/3 creature, which means it's not going to survive this hit. It's going to get plowed. But the objective of this isn't to win on this turn. It's to win on my next turn. So, yeah. Does that really not have the flavor text? It has the flavor text in the game normally, so apparently a lot of the time in these skill quests it doesn't have the flavor text on. Just an interesting ponderance of mine. It's just an interesting thought. Okay, now since it's the opponent's turn, I have enough to crew this because it has a crew cost of 1, and you can do crewing on either your turn or your opponent's turn. There's no concern about that. It just can be done whenever you need to. Like in this case, I'm trying to survive this blow, so help! This one has more than enough. This has 2 points of power, and I just needed 1. So, demonstration time. My enemy has declared attack, and you can do that fast enough to declare, to turn them into a creature and declare them as a blocker. So that is something you can do. Now this one is going to the graveyard. Sorry, Sky Skiff, you're getting wrecked. Literally. Bye. It's nice defending me. Okay, now in this case, I have a very powerful thing here waiting for me. The Aradara Express. It's apparently already been on the field for a while, so that's another thing to think about when it comes to vehicles. If it's the first turn that they're out, they'll still be unable to attack and tap that turn unless they have haste, just like with a normal creature. So they do have summoning sickness despite the fact that they start out usually as an object. So yeah, normally that doesn't apply with artifacts, and that's a special rule, that even though artifacts usually have tap abilities, most of them can be immediately used unless they're a creature. So that's a specialty thing. If it's not a creature at all and does nothing related to being a creature, or it's just then it can be tapped immediately. If it is a creature at the time, then you can't do that until the next turn that has been under your control. So yeah, you have to begin the turn with it already under your control for that to work. So that's the thing. Now this has a crew cost of 4, and it also is a whopping 8/6 creature. That's actually pretty high for that casting cost, but it has the limitation that it's not always a creature. So you got to keep in mind that sometimes cards are less expensive because they have a limitation. And in this case, I got a big whopping possible creature here, but it needs a heavy amount of crew. And that one's not going to cut it because it said the crew cost was 4 and I only have 2. So I need to play a creature first. So here comes this other curio vendor. And this is a good demonstration right now of, as I was going to say, the fact that it doesn't matter why they were untapped. It doesn't matter if they've been under your control for a while. It doesn't matter if they just come under your control and they can't use their own tapping abilities. Because if you crew, it bypasses that. So it's like, it doesn't matter. So it just allows them to be tapped as a special price to be paid, rather than them performing an action themselves, although they are considered crewing the vehicle. Now, there's also a special ability this one has called Menace. It would matter a bit more if it weren't for the fact that that my opponent hasn't played a creature in the middle. Because what Menace means is that it can't be blocked by only one creature. It has to be blocked by at least 2. So basically with this particular train that I'm about to run them over with, I'd be able to railroad 2 enemies in a row sometimes. So yeah, there's that thought. Okay, next phase please. Okay, time to get derailed. Goodbye training drone. See you later. Oh, pretty soon anyhow. Okay, it got wheeled. Yeah, again, this is a reminder that anything counts when it comes to being tapped for that cost. Okay, now let's try another thing that's very specific with Kaladesh, but it's something that I don't know if they're going to have it in like many other sets. So this is very specific to the Kaladesh block. This is about energy tokens. I know that I said before that mana is basically the energy that you use, but so please don't get that too confused. It's kind of a special version. It's not quite the same, but it kind of is. It's kind of a bit different how that goes. But basically, whenever you have energy from Kaladesh block, you have energy counters. And these counters just kind of stockpile up, and you can receive and spend them in different ways. And they're just on the field indefinitely. Unlike mana, the points do not disappear at the end of a phase. It just stays there until you use it. So you can build up a reserve over multiple turns to do something really big. Or you could spend it out as you need it, or whatever. So it's something that's a different kind of reserve. But again, this will be better when shown. Actually, I'm not even sure Menace has a skill quest. I'll have to check that out. I think Flying does. But yeah, this is kind of describing what I was about that whole thing. But again, a little extra time to read it. Ah, it's a this turn thing. Okay. I've already went through these before, but it's been a while. So, yeah. Okay, let's see here. First of all, since I have land, there we go. Oh, wait. Needed to go a little bit differently. Yeah, I'm gonna have to reset that. I clicked a little too fast. The thing is, unlike the actual game, you don't exactly have the ability to to just undeclare something until you're sure you want to do it. In real life, you could totally do that, but here, not exactly. So there's some differences between Magic Duels and the actual game. And normally you also have a bit more time to think about things and just kind of, just think through everything perfectly. Okay, so there we have that. Okay, so I've cast one creature. Okay, that's giving me some energy counters. See how that piles up? Note that in this game it's represented by a singular permanent that has a number on it representing how many you have. Okay. I'm not sure if this can actually be done directly on your turn, although I think you might be able to because of the whole, well, actually I have 4, so I can actually haste both of these. And it doesn't have enough to resist both effects, so yeah. Okay, this one has an ability where whenever it comes into the battlefield, I get an energy counter. This one has an ability where I get 2, and that land also has an ability where I get 1. So that overall is my whole set of 4. So, if I pay this ability, say pay an energy counter, target creature gets haste until end of turn. Well, I can haste up another creature, I can haste up itself. It just said target creature, it didn't say anything specifically otherwise. Now, whenever I do this, this one has a special ability where it says, whenever it attacks, you may pay 2 energy, and if you do, you get a +1/+1 counter on it. Well, that means basically it'd become a 3/2 creature. And this one will already be a 3/3. And this can only block 1 creature. So if I do both at once, because they've been hasted up so that they can both attack right now, and I use its special ability, then either way I'm dealing 3 damage, and that ends this particular lesson. So let's move on to the attack phase. Attack with all. Confirm. Yes, I will pay 2 energy. That spins my reserve. Uh-huh, and the other one gets through. Goodbye. Oh, they say you can always make more. Sometimes making energy is trickier than others depending on what you've got access to, so that may or may not always be true, but energy definitely has a different flow to it. In fact, as I was saying before about it doesn't drain away whenever you end a phase, that also counts your actual end phase. You keep that pool even whenever it's not your turn, and sometimes you can do spontaneous retorts using it. So, yeah, you can actually use it in any situation that you're basically able to in any circumstance. So, you can spend it on opponent's turn, your turn doesn't matter, and it stays in your pool until spent. So, again, energy is a bit different, and it's actually pretty impressive how it works, but it is very different. So, it's just one of those things I'm not sure if they're going to continue having it along or not. So, we'll see. Okay, now I'm going to go with an ability that's from Kaladesh, but it's sort of like some other abilities I've seen before, it's just a little specific. Improvise. Now, certain things will have Improvise, and it means that you can tap artifacts that you control to help you cast a spell with it. Anytime that you do this, it's on a 1-for-1 basis. Like you tap that artifact, it reduces the casting cost by 1 generic mana. And I mean 1 generic, like it won't reduce, it usually won't reduce like colored costs. in terms of the actual colored mana. It'll just reduce the generic amount. Although, yeah, that's basically how it works. Now the thing is that this doesn't matter whether it's an artifact that's a creature or not, because although creatures are usually tapping to attack, it doesn't really matter what it is, or even if the artifact normally even taps at all. You just can do it as part of the casting of the spell. So in this case, we'll show how this works out. So going in here, this training drone is getting a workout today. Yeah, it's pretty much as I was saying, that it can work with pretty much any artifact, regardless of whatever it's supposed to be. As I said, artifact, creatures, vehicles, even artifact tokens such as clues. Clues might show later or might come up later spontaneously, but they're something that is normally sacrificed. They're not something that normally taps, but again, the special ability allows that to happen. So let's go for it. So this is a win this turn thing again. Okay, and that generally means you have more time to think through these skill quests. If your enemy's about to smack you, then it's a bit different. But let's go with this. I have basically I have 2 cards here. I could do this, but at the same time, I don't think that's gonna go over very well because it's supposed to be like this turn, and I don't have anything else out right now. So yeah, I have a very hefty looking freighter here. I mean, this is a decently sized vehicle. Apparently, whenever it attacks, it gets a +1. It gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So it literally just runs things over. Its crew cost is 2. So as I was explaining with crew before, it can actually be pretty impressive. Now, the thing is, this one has already entered the battlefield, and this will just be spontaneous. But that's okay, because whenever that happens, things will be just fine, because it can be tapped because of the crewing ability. Now, I have 4 points of... oh. Okay, let me see what this one has. Improvise. Oh, okay, this one has trample and haste. Okay, so this one would be able to attack spontaneously. Okay, so, yeah, okay, haste always gets rid of that whole no fighting on the same turn thing. So this would be affordable, because if I were to also tap both of these 2 as part of the casting, then I would reduce it down to just enough to use it, and because it has haste, I'd be able to hit my enemy first. So this time, instead of trying to get my freighter powered up and run them over, I'm trying to get my enraged giant over here to just make a very sudden appearance and knock them out. And it has both trample and haste, so this thing looks painful. Because as improvise, I can afford it a little bit ahead of time compared to normal. I am tapping artifacts, so I will tap these 2, because combined I have just enough to do this, because they'll reduce the casting cost by 1 each, and I will need to have these 3 lands here just to pay for the rest of the generic cost, because it was like 5 and 1 red. So by doing these 2, I'll get it down to 3 and 1 red, and I'll have 1 red left because I'll have 1 more mountain. So therefore, I'll be able to just afford this and run them over. And that's one thing about these skill quests, is they tend to be very specific that way. Where you have just enough to do what you need to do. You may occasionally preview something. So now I have this creature here, and I can go straight on to the attack. Here. here's a very angry giant. Get stomped. Is there gonna be a foot animation? Kind of. That kind of looked like it could have been a foot. And yeah, this also reiterates my point that tapping artifacts won't help with the colored mana component of the spell's cost. So yeah, that's the thing to keep in mind. Ooh, that's a nice looking one. Okay, now that was improvised. I'm going to go on to Revolt now. And this is something that's kind of more of a class of abilities rather than something more specific. Basically, a lot of things have this Revolt ability where if if a permanent of any sort left your control uh, from the, or rather left the battlefield during that particular turn, it happens. Like some things are better to be cast after you've already had a permanent either like sacrificed or taken out or whatever, and some of them on the other hand are just able to do that every turn or whatever, just whatever is in the description. But basically, any ability with Revolt means that a permanent has to have left the battlefield that you had control of. So this can get a little bit miscellaneous. So let's just see which example they're using here. I've thrown out a few Revolt abilities already, but yeah, again, it's just really whatever it says. It's not really specific. I apparently have a lot of mana here. But yeah, basically it's reiterating the fact that as long as it leaves the battlefield, doesn't matter whether it's sent to the graveyard or back to your hand or whatever, then it allows the Revolt ability to work. And anything with Revolt, the effect only takes place after a permanent left the battlefield. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Pigs! Okay, that's an interesting announcement. Okay, but yeah, they have a druid. They have a boar. They have another boar. Okay. This is one that I think I remember getting a little wild. Okay. Destroy target creature if it's got a converted mana cost 2 or less, or Revolt if you have that activated destroy that creature if it's converted mana cost 4 or less instead of permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. So yeah. And this has a converted mana cost of 4, so yeah, you'd have to definitely use that. Again, this tends to be really specific. So I'm enchanting it with this particular card. It's called Conviction. But basically, if the enchanted creature gets +1/+3, and if you pay 1 white, you can return Conviction to its owner's hand. Basically, this is an enchantment effect, so it attaches to a permanent of whatever type it normally says, and specifically auras always attach to permanents. Enchantments that don't have aura on them are usually just put onto the field, and they just have whatever effect they have, and it can even be like really long term and world affecting. So enchantments are a pretty big deal. Now, I just need to get this to leave my hand. Because remember, I said it doesn't matter how it leaves the battlefield as long as it does. So, that's back into my hand. I now use this thing called Fatal Push to obliterate this creature. This is the only one left that would be able to block me. And now I have just enough to re-enchant my creature. This Bastion Enforcer is apparently rather gilded, so they got some serious bling with some serious energy on it. So, yeah. And now I have nothing else to do, so it's time to attack. And this also finishes this lesson because they're about to be smacked with something that equals their life total. So goodbye. So see, because I was able to get it to leave my my battlefield, I was able to power up a spell to be able to do more than it normally would because it had the revolt ability, which means again, if anything leaves your battlefield, it gets some sort of bonus whenever it's played afterwards. So yeah, that totally is exactly how that had to go down. Revolt is not necessarily always something you should rely on though, because it can be a bit awkward sometimes. On the other hand, it usually makes rewards pretty well. So it kind of depends on your style. So I went over energy, revolt vehicles, and improvise. I can't think of anything else that's in the Kaladesh block, because again, I was kind of going over that, and I'm not thinking that that's going to be a thing. Yeah, I think, uh, yeah, I think that that was all that was in Kaladesh block. So in that case, I'll leave you off with that. This has been Glitch Reaper here with another Magic Duels tutorial. I'll be logging off for now. Hope to hear from you all later, and bye for now, everybody.